The train screamed against the rails as it tore through the icy dusk of Montana territory. Evie Haraway clung to the undercarriage like a frostbitten ghost, every limb numb, every thought sharper than the steel beneath her. Wind cut through her dress, already torn and soiled, and the burn on her left thigh throbbed like it was singing to the cold. She had no gloves, no plan, just a sliver of instinct that told her this, the open, merciless West, was better than the gilded cage she'd left behind. It had been 3 days since she fled Charleston in a servant's coat and a pair of worn boots. She'd barely eaten. She hadn't slept. She carried only a waterlogged copy of Jane Eyre, a locket she hadn't dared open, and the envelope she couldn't bring herself to destroy, the one bearing Gideon Harlow's name and the wedding vows she never said aloud. But tonight, even her desperation couldn't outlast the storm. Somewhere south of Helena, the train slowed. Evie dropped into snow that swallowed her up to the knees. The cold was no longer cold. It was punishment. Her body ached, visions swam, and every part of her screamed for rest. She stumbled through a grove of naked trees, her feet breaking through crusted snow, her breath ragged, hot against frozen air. Please don't let this be the end, she thought. Not here, not like this. She barely registered the figure on horseback until the rifle cocked. "Stop right there!" a voice growled. Evie froze, eyes wide. Her lips parted, but no words came. She was beyond words, just fear and ice and a mind fraying at the edges. The man dismounted slowly, tall, broad, dressed in a battered shearling coat with a beard that made him look more bear than man. He didn't lower the rifle. Evie collapsed into the snow. When she woke, she was warm, she was alive, and she was somewhere entirely unfamiliar. The cabin smelled of pine, smoke, and something faintly metallic. Her head ached, her hands itched from frostnip, and her side screamed every time she moved. But the fire blazed steady in the hearth, and a blanket, real wool, was pulled over her. She tried sitting up. "No," came the voice. "Lie still." She turned her head. The man sat across from her at a rough-hewn table, carving something with a pocket-knife. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "Where am I?" she croaked. "Nowhere worth naming." He stood, walked over, and crouched beside her, holding out a tin cup. "Drink." Slowly. Evie hesitated, then took it with shaking hands. The broth was salty, thin, but it filled a hole she hadn't realized was there. "You fell out of the sky?" he asked, watching her. "Train," she murmured. "Freight car. Southbound." He nodded. "Figures." Silence stretched between them, thick and coiled. He waited. She didn't offer more. Finally, he stood. "I'm Wyatt Callahan. This is my land." Evie considered giving him her real name. The one printed on every Charleston invitation and courthouse document. Instead, she whispered, "Anna." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "You can stay here until you can walk." "I'll be gone by then," she said quickly. He raised an eyebrow but didn't challenge her. The next day, she asked for work. "I'm not here to be a burden," she said. "I can cook, sew, I can learn." Wyatt handed her a bucket and pointed to the creek. "Don't fall in." She didn't, but she nearly froze trying to crack the ice. He let her help with the firewood too, and by day 3 she was feeding the hens and learning to keep the stove lit. Her hands blistered, but she didn't complain. Wyatt didn't offer comfort, just nodded when things were done right. That night, after a long silence over cornbread and beans, he finally asked, "You running from something, or to something?" Evie stared into her tin cup. "He said I was the answer to his problem," she said softly. "But I'm not anyone's solution. I'm just trying to survive." Wyatt didn't push. Later, in the stillness, she walked outside and looked up at the stars, They didn't look like Charleston's. These were cold, clear, and so painfully vast she felt like she might float up into them. Inside, Wyatt was whittling something again. She watched from the doorway. "You always carve alone?" she asked. "Not always," he said, eyes never lifting. Evie sat across from him. Her fingers trembled slightly as they rested on her lap. "Back east, people talked a lot," she said, "even when they didn't mean anything. And here? Here it's different. You don't have to pretend." Wyatt looked up. His gaze was sharp, but not cruel. "That why you came?" Evie nodded. "Not to find peace, just to stop pretending." As she lay in bed that night, wrapped in borrowed wool, she thought of Gideon, of his voice telling her, "This is your duty, Evelyn. Don't ruin this for us." She remembered the way his hand tightened on her wrist when she asked who the man in his study was. She remembered the shame that wasn't hers, but was laid on her like a noose. Here, there were no mirrors, no corsets, no piano recitals or luncheon menus. Here, there was just breath, wood, fire. And the man with storm-colored eyes who hadn't asked for her story, but hadn't turned her away either. Outside, in the woods, boot prints crunched in fresh snow. Far off, a gloved hand reached into a coat pocket and unfolded a wanted notice. "Evelyn Haraway. Reward for safe return." The hunter turned toward the lights in the cabin windows and started walking. You'd be surprised how loud silence can feel when you're hiding something you can't name. The words slipped from Evie's mouth before she could stop them. They lingered in the air like smoke, drifting across the narrow cabin as Wyatt paused mid-step near the stove. He didn't turn around. Didn't answer. Just let the fire crackle and the kettle hum while her face burned in the quiet. She hadn't meant to say it, not out loud, but something about the way this place held its breath, the long stretches of wordless labor, the way Wyatt looked at her without trying to own her, rattled something loose. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was sharp-edged, like splintered glass. She busied herself with the chipped plates, drying them one by one, as if the act could somehow erase the sentence she'd spoken. But it didn't. It never did. Wyatt finally turned, poured coffee into 2 mugs, and slid one across the table toward her. He sat, still silent. Evie took the cup, her fingers brushing the warmth like it might steady her. "Sorry," she muttered. He didn't respond right away. Then, simply, "Don't apologize for truth." She blinked. "It wasn't truth, just nerves. Same thing out here." They drank in silence. Not the sharp kind this time. A heavier, slower one. The kind that settled between 2 people who had more ghosts than stories. Outside, the wind howled against the cabin walls. Over the next few days, she learned to match Wyatt's rhythm. He wasn't cruel or cold, just used to being alone. His speech was economical, his eyes always calculating, but never accusing. In the mornings, she woke to the scent of coffee and cedar. She dressed in the same patched clothes, boots 2 sizes too large, and joined him in the barn without needing to be told. She learned to muck stalls, to split kindling, to hold her own when the hens tried to peck at her heels. Each night, the silence returned, and each night she tried not to flinch at it. Then came Tuesday. She was repairing a tear in one of Wyatt's flannel shirts when the dog started barking. Wyatt appeared in the doorway with his rifle half raised. "Someone's coming." Evie's heart kicked. She followed him out, half hiding behind the barn wall. A man on horseback approached from the south, tall, lean, sun-worn. His hat shadowed his face, but the way he sat, the saddle said he'd been riding longer than most men walked. Wyatt didn't lower his rifle. The rider stopped a few paces out and raised a hand. "Easy, neighbour. Just Silas Boone. Brought you that grain and axle grease you wanted." Wyatt squinted. Didn't expect you till Thursday. Didn't expect this thaw either. Wyatt lowered the rifle but didn't smile. Come on in. Silas was older than Wyatt, 60 maybe, with a voice like weathered leather and a way of talking that wrapped around you slow. Evie kept to herself at first, but Silas noticed her quickly. And who's this? He asked, eyes kind but sharp. Anna, Wyatt said before she could answer. She's staying a while. Silas tipped his hat. Miss Anna. Pleasure. She nodded. Likewise. They sat around the fire after supper, Silas talking more than Wyatt ever did, stories of cattle, weather, foolish greenhorns who thought they could break a Mustang in a day. At some point, Wyatt left to check on the barn. Silas leaned in slightly. You from around here? Evie hesitated. No. He studied her a moment. Not pushy, just observant. You look like you're used to softer winters. That obvious? He chuckled. You carry cold different than we do. She looked down at her hands, raw, blistered, healing. I'm learning. That you are. He sipped his drink. Wyatt don't bring many folks up here, not since... He cut himself off. Well, he's a good man, just got scars where most folks got conversation. Evie almost smiled. Sounds familiar. After Silas left the next morning, Wyatt found her standing by the chicken coop, staring into the trees. You worried he'll talk? He asked. She shook her head. He won't. He's decent. Wyatt looked at her, longer than usual. You keep expecting trouble, he said, because trouble keeps looking for me. He nodded like he understood. Anything you need to tell me? Evie opened her mouth, closed it. Her throat tightened around the words. I can't, she whispered. Not yet. Wyatt didn't press. He just said, then don't lie to yourself. That night, she had the dream again. The study. The fireplace. Gideon's voice. This isn't a choice. It's who we have to be. Then the pressure on her wrists. The silence. The smile he wore in public layered over something monstrous and hungry. She woke, choking on air, hands clutching the blanket like it might save her. Wyatt's voice came from the other room. Calm. Steady. You all right? She took a breath. I'm fine, she said. Another pause. Need anything? No. Silence. Then softer. Sometimes the silence feels safer than it is. She let that hang there. Then whispered, almost to herself, you'd be surprised how loud silence can feel when you're hiding something you can't name. The wind moaned outside, high and cold, and somewhere in the darkness between pine and snow, a man read the back of a saloon ledger, a name scribbled by the barkeep. Pretty girl. Said her name was Anna. Didn't talk much. Might have gone north toward the ridge. The man folded the paper, mounted his horse, and turned toward the mountains. They don't want a wife. They want silence that wears a dress. Evie said it without bitterness, but the words landed like a punch in the chest. The flicker of the oil lamp caught the glint of Wyatt's eyes, and for a moment he didn't say anything, just kept whittling the small piece of wood in his hands, thin curls falling like snow onto the floorboards. It was late. The cabin was heavy with smoke and shadows. Outside, the wind had died, and the forest was too quiet. Even the wolves were still tonight. Wyatt finally set the knife down. That what he wanted from you? She didn't answer right away. Her hands tightened in her lap. She was sitting at the table, legs curled beneath her, wrapped in one of Wyatt's old shirts over her own worn clothes. She stared at the fire, its glow reflecting off the wetness in her eyes. No, she said finally. It's worse than that. He didn't even want me. Just the image. A clean, quiet wife to pose with in photos, to stand beside him at rallies. He didn't need a person, just a body that didn't speak. Wyatt didn't interrupt. He used to say I was perfect optics, she said, that I looked the part. That's all I ever was to him. A prop. The silence that followed wasn't sharp like before. It was the kind that asked no questions, offered no pity, but listened. The kind that came from someone who knew what it meant to be used up and discarded. Earlier that day, Silas had returned. He came bearing a sack of oats, a new horseshoe, and a sharp eye. He greeted them like usual, but his glance toward Evie lingered half a second too long. Wyatt noticed. Evie did too. Over coffee, Silas leaned forward. "You ever hear of a man named Gideon Harlow?" he asked casually. Evie froze. Her hand stopped mid-stir in her cup. Wyatt looked up, jaw tight. "Why?" Silas rubbed his chin. "He's been poking around the edges of Bozeman. Asked about a girl. Said she's run off. Fiancé, he claimed." Evie stood suddenly. "I need air." She walked out into the cold, breath short, vision spinning. She'd known it was coming. She just didn't think it would be so soon. Later, Wyatt found her sitting behind the barn, knees pulled to her chest. "He's here," she whispered. "Close enough," he said. Evie drew in a shaky breath. "He's not going to stop. He can't afford to. He's running for office, Wyatt. With money. Connections." And a lie too big to fail. Wyatt sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees. "You think he's dangerous?" She turned to him. "I know he is. He plays clean in public. But behind closed doors, he's the kind of man who knows exactly how much hurt he can get away with, because no one would believe the girl over the golden boy." Wyatt stared off into the dark woods, where pines stretched endlessly toward the sky. "I've known that kind," he said finally. "They ride the system like it's theirs, and mostly it is." Evie shivered. "They don't want a wife. They want silence that wears a dress." Wyatt didn't correct her, didn't soften it, just looked at her like he saw all of her, and didn't flinch. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept picturing Gideon's smile, the way he'd tighten it when cameras were off, the way he'd hold her wrist just a little too long in private, then brush it off as passion. The way he once whispered, "Say one word, and I'll ruin you so thoroughly no one will remember you ever had a voice." She rose quietly and slipped outside. The sky was filled with stars, cold and distant. She walked to the shed, past the broken fence line where the wind couldn't hear her cry. She didn't notice Wyatt watching from the window. In the morning, Wyatt handed her a saddlebag. "What's this?" she asked. "Tools? Knife? Compass? Jerky? Map? If he comes and you have to run again, you won't be doing it blind." Evie stared at him. "You believe me?" "Didn't need to. I saw you." She swallowed hard. "You don't have to protect me." "I ain't," he said. "I'm giving you choices. That's all." Evie held the bag close, not sure if she wanted to cry or scream or collapse. Silas arrived again before sunset. This time, he brought more than supplies. "I've got something," he said quietly, once inside. He handed Wyatt a folded sheet of paper, an article clipped from a Helena paper, barely a week old. It detailed Gideon Harlow's campaign for territorial senate. There was a smiling photo of him shaking hands with a railroad executive, but Silas tapped the fine print. "Engaged to Evelyn Haraway, daughter of Charleston's own Senator Haraway. Ceremony postponed due to illness." Evie nearly gagged. He was still using her name, still pretending they were together, still branding her with a lie she couldn't scrub off. She grabbed the page, crumpled it, and threw it into the fire. Flames flared. "I can't keep running," she whispered. "But I can't go back either." Silas looked at Wyatt. "Then you'd best get ready for visitors. Word is, he's hiring." Wyatt frowned. "Hiring what?" "Men who don't ask questions." That night, Evie wrote for the first time in weeks, not in her name, not to her father, just thoughts, scribbled onto the back of an old feed invoice. "If he finds me, I won't be silent. If I fall, I'll do it screaming the truth. If I die, at least I'll be facing the storm, not hiding from it." Outside, snow began to fall again, but the wind carried something different now. Not warning, not threat, a reckoning. In the shadows beneath the trees, a man folded his gloves into his coat and watched the light go out in the cabin window. He'd tracked her from the city, through train records, through the drunk in the saloon, through the girl with 2 clean hands asking about safe towns. He was close. He smiled. You can lie to people, you can lie to yourself, but the mountain, she strips it off you. The snow had fallen thick overnight, muffling every sound but the crunch of boots and the soft woof of horses in the paddock. Evie stood at the fence line, steam rising off her breath in clouds, her hands wrapped tight in gloves too big for her fingers. Her hair was tucked under a knit cap, her cheeks red with cold, but her eyes, those sharp, stubborn eyes, were locked on the tree line. He was out there. She didn't know who exactly, but someone was watching. She could feel it. Wyatt came up behind her, carrying a bucket of oats for the horses. He didn't say anything at first, just looked where she was looking. "You saw something?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I feel it. You ever feel like the trees are holding their breath?" He nodded slowly. "That's the mountain warning you." They stood like that for a minute, shoulder to shoulder, neither one ready to admit how the air had changed. Then Wyatt handed her the bucket. They still need feed, even with ghosts in the woods. The day passed with a kind of nervous energy. Wyatt worked the horses harder. Evie chopped wood longer than she needed. They moved like people preparing for something unnamed. Neither talked about Gideon. Neither talked about what might come. That night, Wyatt made stew and sat across from her by the fire, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug. "You think about staying?" he asked. Evie blinked. "What do you mean?" "Here. The mountains. This place. If the threat passed, if no one was looking for you, would you stay?" She didn't answer right away. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm still running, even when I stop." Wyatt nodded. "This place don't care about your past. It don't care what your name is. Just cares if you earn your keep and don't lie to yourself." Evie stared into the flames. "That sounds harder than outrunning him." "It is," he said, "but it's worth more." She looked over at him. "Why'd you stay?" Wyatt was quiet for a while. Then, "I came here with my wife. 10 years back. We had plans. Big ones. She died 3 years in. Fire took the barn, the horses, her too. The town turned their backs on us long before that. Said we were foolish to build out here alone." Evie said nothing. The pain in his voice wasn't loud, but it was heavy. "I stayed because I couldn't go back to pretending. Couldn't smile at people who let her die. Couldn't sit in a chair